Hello, my name is James Klim. I love that at the end. It reminds me of a lot of good things in life. Used to remind me of when I'd make those 3-pointers and I'd hear that swish of the basket. Nothing like that. Well, today is going to be a 3-pointer interview. I'm so excited with our guest that we have today, and he's what I consider one of the most brilliant people I've met in dentistry. Incredible educator. I'm keeping you in suspense, so I'll get there in just a moment. But just a few things. I'm up here on my ranch. This is my theater. I get my PM7 milling unit from Ivoclair in a week or two, and I'm really excited because I love to play in digital dentistry. It's made a huge difference in my life, and it's provided this joy factor that I really like. Our guest, Dr. Stephen Schiffenhaus, has such an incredible background. Before he ever became a dentist, think of this, someone who has a bachelor and master's degree in molecular and cellular biology, undergraduate and graduate research on biomarkers for cancer vaccine, a master's degree in biomechanical science, and finally, he decided to get his dental degree at Midwestern University, where he's taken all that wealth of knowledge into his practice there in Gilbert, Arizona. He also founded, I think, the Bard Institute, and that's a special emphasis on biomimetic advanced adhesive dentistry. The Bard Institute also has approval credentials for the American Academy of General Dentistry, which is pretty much CE recognized in North America. And he's married to Sarah, his beautiful wife, and he has 2 beautiful children, James and Margaret. Thank you for coming on. By the way, you founded the Bard Institute, did you not?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to float out of here after all that. James, thank you so much for the amazing introduction. Thank you so much. So I founded it in 2020. I kind of joke, like I feel like I made an institute in my mom's basement. I wanted to create a teaching platform, and what do you name it? And so I thought about, naming it Schiffenhaus or something to do with my name, but I was trying to take myself out of it a little bit. I kind of regret it a little bit. Maybe it should have been the Schiffenhaus Institute, but that's not easy to say. Bard's easier.
Yeah.
So, so I created the Bard Institute, and it mostly because you knew that in the Facebook group Keep Saraching that I was gaining a lot of popularity. One of my biggest inspirations was Dhaval Patel, and I wanted to prep like him, and I feel like I got close. I'm still not there yet. And so people really admired my work, would ask me how I was doing what I was doing. And so first I was just going to make a couple slides on my prep protocol, but that was right when I was getting back into biomimetic dentistry and doing non-retentive restorations and relying heavily on bonding. And I just didn't think it was right to teach people non-retentive restoration design and not teach them how to bond it. So I'm like, well, I need to do a course, and I can't ever do anything simply. So I created essentially an 18 credit hour online course and an in-person version of it. And so I didn't really want to work for a bigger place. I wanted to be able to have more control over what I did. So I just called my institute the Bard Institute. I am now accredited to give CE credit.
I saw
that's
that.
kind of how it started.
Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot. In fact, have you been audited yet?
No. Does that happen?
Yeah, it does. In fact, one of the doctors showed up to audit, and I had an extra workstation, so I put him down there, and he went through the 2 days, and we had a good time. But no, I admire that because it takes a lot of work, and to recertify, you have to pay attention to all the details. But
I've got to give a shout out to Melissa Siebert. She's also a key opinion leader educator, and she really helped me the first go around. So she had accreditation and we did a co-sponsorship, and then she really helped pretty much put together and helped me with my application for the first go round. And then the second go round, I was on my own. So Jeff, who's at the AGD that runs it, I asked him a ton of questions. That's my impression with like an audit or stuff like that. They're not trying to get you; they're trying to help. And that's really all there is.
And it does keep us at the top of our game. I do have to ask you about your social media. You have over 50,000 followers there on Instagram. That's pretty amazing. And I need to pay more attention to that because I put so much of my energy into my online site. I didn't pay that much attention to these other social medias. And I'm starting to do that now because it does get your message out and helps you to connect with others and it helps us to improve our industry.
Yeah, it's funny because you and I talked off camera a little bit about a hobby that we share, and that was actually what got me into
Yeah.
Instagram was that, and I was a consumer of it, and that community and people posting how they do things and having influencers and followers and all that kind of I consumed that, and it was right
Hmm.
around the end of 2019 when I went to Davo Patel, and he let me know how much of a following I had on Keep Saraking. I kind of told my wife, maybe I should create my own following instead of being in a group.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still post a lot in those groups, and I still love Dovel. So in December of 19, I created a Dr. Schiffenhaus DMD Instagram account and started posting my cases there. And I kind of already knew how to play the game from seeing other industries use Instagram in a similar way. And like you just said, it's a great way to connect with people that want to learn from you. They can send you
Hmm.
DMs, you can put stuff in your story, you can show little tips and tricks. And so, yeah, within a year, I had 25,000 followers, and it kind of just grew from there.
I love this conversation that we're having. Just a few moments from our sponsor for today's podcast. Today's sponsor of this podcast is by Health Professionals Alliance, their mainstay CSO. What is that? Well, I'm going to ask you a question that was asked to me years ago. What could you do if you didn't have to practice dentistry? Then I asked this question, could I still do dentistry? And the answer was yes. How would you practice? I've made that move. I lessened my dependence on insurance. In fact, now I have a fee-for-service practice. I work fewer hours. I have better profitability. I have a significant revenue increase. And with today's technology wealth, I've converted my practice from analog fully into digital dentistry. Yes, that is the objective of Mainstay CSO. In addition to that, you will join a plethora of practices with the financial backing to either grow your practice to multiple practices, or maybe you're looking to get out of dentistry in a few years and you're looking for a good partnership to sell your practice to without losing your independence. And that is what Mainstay CSO is all about. That is retaining your independence to practice so you can have that relationship with your patient. So one day when we all have to make that choice of retirement, we know we have made good decisions in building up the stewardship value of our assets so we can retire, take care of our family, and live the life that we want to live. Below is a link to Mainstay CSO. If you have an interest, go ahead and go to their website and give them a call. Let's step back for just a moment. I have to ask you more about your molecular and cellular biology and that background that you have. How did you choose dentistry?
So the Schiffenhaus name is semi-famous in the corrugated box industry. So my
Okay.
family emigrated to New Jersey in the late 1800s and started a box company in Newark, New Jersey called Schiffenhaus Packaging. And it was sold in 2005. But when I started college in 2001, it was still around. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was just in a generic business degree, and it wasn't going well because I really didn't have any direction. And I actually decided to go pre-med. And while I was pre-med, I started doing undergraduate research in the chemistry department. But it's funny, I don't know why I went up there because I wanted to do stuff with DNA, and they weren't really doing stuff with DNA. So, and the only paper I've been published on is actually from that brief stint in the chemistry department. I made gold nanoparticles and managed not to blow myself up. Anyway, so I moved over to the Biodesign Institute and did undergraduate research with an immunologist, and the whole focus of the group was to come up with biomarkers for a cancer vaccine. And believe it or not, it was going to be an mRNA vaccine.
Yeah.
And this is back in 2006,
Mm-hmm.
2007-ish. So yeah, I did undergraduate research there for a while. I wasn't getting any closer to getting into medical school. So, and the professor I was doing research with wanted to keep me. So he's like, hey, why don't you do a PhD program and you can still apply to med school? And I was like, cool. So I did the PhD program. But as soon as I started, it was like, I don't want to hear about med school. Go get me data. So for 2 years, I don't want to throw stones. Great guy taking care of me. And I got really good data. I moved over to working on kind of proteins that we never got close to doing the vaccine, but at the very least, what we wanted to do was maybe find some unique proteins that you can find in patients' plasma for cancer patients for early detection. Like we have PSA for prostate cancer. So at the very least, we're hoping we can find some screening tools. But as a side quest, kind of like, like internet gaming era, on a side quest, as it always is with research, basic research, to see if we can characterize some of these cancer specific proteins we were finding. And that's what I was doing those 2 years. But I really could have been a professor, but I really wanted to do clinical stuff, and I didn't want to work in the same room with the same 5 people. So I left with a master's degree after passing my comprehensive exam. That's why I have a master's degree. But I was in a PhD program getting that training for about 2.5 years. And then crazily, I wound up doing substitute teaching. I was a long-term substitute. I taught biology to sophomores in high school. Okay. I had a master's degree, so I taught biology at a community college. And while I was in the master's program, I had taken the MCAT and done really well. So I went back to Princeton Review and I taught biology for MCAT prep and tutored it for a while. So that's where I kind of gained my teaching background and the science background.
Oh, nice.
So sorry, this is a 10-minute story, but I'm wrapping it up in a second. So I still wasn't as close to getting into med school as I would have liked to be. So I investigated what are called like biomed programs, where you do a 1-year master's at a medical school. And if you do well, they tend to bring you in because you've kind of proven yourself. So I'd gotten into Boston University. I was in the short list at Georgetown, and I got into the DO school at Midwestern. And I don't know why, I kind of knew my wife liked dentistry. So I teased her. I'm like, hey, they have a dental school. She's like, oh my God, you consider that. And I was like, I didn't know anything about dentistry. I've only ever had a couple fillings. So she's like, I was like, what? They don't even make money. They make more than the doctors. I'm like, really? And I investigated it, and I was like, wow, this is more what I thought medicine was going to be, was what dentistry was like. And I had shadowed at least 5 doctors. Every MD I shadowed was like, you're a bright, nice young guy. Get out of here. Don't do medicine. I hate my life. It was crazy. It was like 2 surgeons. The radiologist was the worst. The radiologist was the most depressing. He was like, dude, do not do this. And so I shadowed a dentist, and he just loved his life. He was 55, paid off his note, whistling between operatories, working 3 days a week. And I was like, you know what? This seems a little bit more chill. So I took the DAT. I did well on it, and then I switched from pre-med to pre-dental. I did well on the biomed program, and I went to dental school. That's really the story.
I love that. And, one of my emphasis, particularly in my life, has been finding the love in dentistry. It seems that you found your love within this ecosystem, and particularly with the conservative restoration. And, listening to you, we'll just call each other's by first name. Is that cool? So, Steve, please. Just listening to you, I see why you're so good at your education, because you understand proteins, you understand the cellular level of what we do so naturally. How did you find that affinity for the biomimetic approach within the conservative aspect of what we do today? Because I've always considered the new gold foil. I'm old. Yeah. I did gold foil. I consider the new gold foil of dentistry to be biomimetic.
I actually completely agree with you. I at one of my courses a year and a half ago, I had I think 65-year-old dentist who was a Tucker Study Club guy come and take my course. I was so intimidated. I was like, dude, like I'm like barely a puppy compared to you. Like, what can I teach you? And he was really sweet because he said that, what you're doing and the Tucker people have way more in common than you think, because the Tucker Gold people were the OG minimally invasive treatment. And I kind of feel like there should be more of a passing of a torch. He said that there should be more of a passing of a torch, and these two groups working together, because they're just a newer age version of the same thing. I thought that was a really, really cool perspective. In terms of how I got into it, it was a natural fit. When I was in my second year of dental, we had to do a paper at Midwestern, and it was basically, the question was, go on PubMed and write a paper with 10 references and tell us what is the best bonding agent and system. There wasn't supposed to be a right answer, but we all found the Van Meerbeek 2010 review where he looked at thousands of articles over 30 years, and his conclusion at the end was a 2-step self-etch with a selective etch. And he said the Clearfill SE was the, full disclosure, I do a lot of speaking with Karari and I get honorariums from them, but he said in the paper that Clearfill SE was the best in that category. The other, what he called gold standard, was 3-step etch and rinse, and OptiBond FL was the best in that category. And amazingly, at our dental school, we had Clearfill SE Protect on the clinic side. So when I got the clinic side, that's what I always used because I had read like 3 dozen papers and I understood very well like how bonding works, what we're supposed to do. But what I also found when I got on the clinic side, and I'm not trying to knock my seniors because there's always so much I can learn from an experienced dentist, but there was just such a disconnect between evidence-based practices and what actually happens in the real world.
In other
And some
words,
of that,
us older guys had biases, right?
well, because on the one hand, what happens on a lab bench is not what happens in a patient's mouth, and
No.
we have to understand that when we look at research. But on the other hand, like you just said, you can't just go based off your own experiences. That's not really calibrated. That's not really, I'm trying to find the word. It's just, you're in your own box and it's not verifiable. So anyway, so I got into there and I actually had a guy that was like, sort of like a substitute teacher in the clinic, Dr. Mark Hayden. And he was a biomimetic guy and they all kind of treated him like he was a weird hippie. I felt like it's like, oh, he does this weird voodoo. He does whole crowns out of composite and it's just weird stuff. Don't do that. But that guy is the best bondodontist we know. So listen to him about adhesive dentistry. So it was funny. They respected his adhesive approach. So he just kind of, I melded with him. He's a really good dude. I hung out with him every chance I could for 2 years, picked his brain on everything. He was a biomimetic guy, but he never really pushed the biomimetic thing on me. He just taught me really good adhesive principles. So I could probably talk for another 5 minutes on it, but that's basically where I got my first inspiration was trying to use evidence to use best practices. I wanted to do minimally invasive work because that's what makes the most sense to me as someone who's generally holistic, not granola, but I think minimal intervention in our own bodies is always the best.
I hear you. In fact, when I got out of school, we were still lining the dentin with Dical, if you remember those days. And then I graduated into glass ionomer. In fact, then I went to a Bertolotti lecture where he was using Carrari, and we got into full etch, which was considered sacrilege to adhesive dentistry on the enamel only. That's how far I go back. And then I went through those earlier days of full etch and in that journey. And I think the systems we have are so much better now. But one question I want to ask you about is the core aspect of biomimetic, particularly in the function of the restoration in relationship to the full truth as far as the loading factors go. But why don't you fill our audience in the real value of lining that dentin, pre-sealing before making the final restorations? And by the way, I love your photography. In fact, we'll post Stephen's all his social media below and his website and all that. But you've got to join his media site, and particularly the I'm getting a mental fog here on
Instagram.
Instagram. There we go. Hey, it happens. I'm up here in my country abode here, and I get really relaxed, and sometimes my brain slows down a little bit. But you've got to look at Stephen's photography there on Instagram. Is awesome. But why don't you go into the value so our audience will understand the value of pre-sealing dentin? Now, in the old days, it used to be because we didn't do it in one appointment. And I know you're also a CAD/CAM doctor as well, so you can put this together in one appointment. Why don't you go through that value of pre-sealing dentin and how you build up that layer for adhesive purposes, and then what the evidence is in the science right now about the added benefits to dental bonding and longevity, because a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Yeah, so one thing I had alluded to before was, the fact that we see these results on the lab bench and we wonder why do they not translate to the mouth? And the main reason is because of how controllable things are on a lab bench. But we can look at the lab bench and say, well, how can we get these same results in the patient's mouth? One of the reasons you always see bond tests so high on a lab bench is because they're usually bonding on flat surfaces and they're not in a rush. So two things are happening. One, they're not dealing with C factor, and I could review that quickly in a minute before people fall asleep. and they're not rushing the setting of their bond. So, one of the most important things for me to learn that I didn't understand was Dr. Haid would always say, like, we need to let the bond mature, let the bond mature. I'm like, what does it mean? Is it like an
Right.
adolescent? What is this like maturing thing? And I actually wasn't until I met Dan Clementino that he helped make it make sense to me, which was the idea that, well, when you put a light on your adhesive, is it 100% strong or does it take time to come to full strength? And I was like, oh, so there's a time component. So Matt Najad, one of my friends, has a really great analogy. He says, have you ever tried to use an adhesive picture hanger? And it's like, sure. And if you haven't, I'll explain it to you. The directions say, clean the wall. So you clean the wall with alcohol. Let it dry because, you can't stick to things that are wet very well or dirty. So now you've cleaned it, you've let it dry. You peel the sticky, put it on there. And it usually says, wait 5 minutes to an hour before hanging the picture. Why? Because if the adhesive isn't fully set on the wall, it's going to rip it off and fall off. So we know this already. And even with traditional dentistry, we know this with using traditional luting agents. You load the crown up, you smush it down. Do you start scaling right away? No, you wait 5 minutes. And even after 5 minutes, you scale gingerly because you don't want to rip that crown off because it's not set. So that is what's happening with our bonding agent, is when we cure on enamel, because enamel is super dry and very hard and mineralized, that reaction actually happens very quickly. When you cure bond onto enamel, it locks in, it has a good grip on that hard enamel, and it's not going to get torn off very easily. That's why enamel veneers are just, I don't want to say idiot proof, they're monkey proof. And that's why even since the 90s, everybody and their mother has done very well doing enamel veneers. But when we get to dentin, because that bond doesn't happen instantaneously and it can get disrupted and broken, it's more technique sensitive. Whenever my wife bakes a cake, there's like this time, I don't know if it's a half hour, 45 minutes. She's like, don't make any loud noises because the cake is sort of almost baked, but if you stress it, it's going to fall into itself. And that's sort of what the dentin bond formation is like. It hardens slower than the enamel bond. And you can look at this in the literature. It's verifiable. Yeah. So it's maturing more slowly. So if you pull on it or you stress it, you break it apart and you ruin it. And you can't go back to square one. Just like pulling your crown off or putting the painting on the picture too early. So what's happening when we're doing ceramic restorations? What also gets lost in this process is, hey, we understand that composites shrink when we cure them. And that it can pull on the adhesive and it's not fully gripped onto the dent. And it's going to make gaps, which is going to lower bond strength and deteriorate things over time. But wait a minute, we're using resin cement and it's a really thin layer. So it's not a lot of volume. So I don't think it's very stressful, but it's the opposite. So quick review of C factor. And James, stop me when I'm going too deep into this stuff.
No, listen, I want to know the C factor because this is the core of the value of what you're teaching the world.
So C factor is the ratio of bonded to unbonded surfaces. So generally speaking, if I have a flat surface, I bond it and I put composite over it and then I cure it. The composite, because there's monomers in them and they flow, I'm not going to get more into it than that, it actually will shrink towards the bonded surface. And because composite is a plastic and all the uncured composite is really, really elastic, all the area that's not attached to the bonded surface is like where it can kind of relax. So when you're on a flat surface, it's shrinking towards the bond, not pulling away from it. And it has a ton of room to relax and sort of dissipate that energy. When you add two surfaces like this, you now have a corner. So you have less unbonded surface to relax from, and now you're shrinking in two different directions, and it's pulling on itself and it's creating more stress. When you have a high C factor like a box, you now have almost no free surface for relaxation, and you have the stress of pulling on three different walls. The analogy I use in my classes is I go, if I'm standing with my arms and legs out and you say, put them together, that's easy. If I'm holding the wall in one spot, then I'm just going to pull myself towards the wall. But if I got my arms in two different places, now there's some resistance. I hook my legs in, now there's all sorts of stress. And the weakest hook is going to give. So when we silinate our ceramics and get them ready for bonding, that is just like enamel. It bonds almost instantaneously and has a good grip. So if you have these two competing areas, one with a poor grip and a good grip, it's going to shrink up to alleviate the stress. So let's get back to our ceramic situation. It's like, hey, Steve, it's not a very high volume. That's very true. I told you that C factor is the ratio of bonded to unbonded surfaces. In the cement spacer region, how much of that surface area is just free unbonded surface? Not very much. You literally have wall to wall everywhere. So you have this tight competition of shrinking as soon as you cure it. So there's actually, in the original guys that did, Davidson, Felser, and DeGee, that did the papers on C factor, later on in the early 90s did a bunch of papers saying how the C factor in the cement spacer region is extremely high, which is why they're seeing a lot of sensitivity in debonds and inlays. They also found that inlays would kind of flex inwards like 10 microns just from the stress of the cement shrinkage. So it's a common misconception that there's no stress. The other thing that I would talk about that simplifies this for everybody, I did it at the last Keep Saraking meeting, is that typically when you get your adhesive resin cements, so not self-adhesive, the big difference is a self-adhesive is there's just a paste.
Right.
An adhesive resin cement system, which has better bonding, will have an injectable or a paste sort of syringe of composite resin cement, and then it'll have like a bonding agent or tooth conditioner. And so what you'll do is the directions will tell you is apply the bonding agent to the tooth, dentin and enamel, and you can either cure it or leave it wet because it works well with this resin cement system. And then you can either cure it or leave it wet, put the resin cement into the ceramic, smush the whole thing together, and then cure it all at once. Interestingly, a lot of my European friends that did CAD/CAM in the early 2000s, and James, you can also speak to this because I'm not sure how it was in the States, they were all told always pre-cure the adhesive. And then I know Dhaval Patel's been using OptiBond FL forever, and so if he's pre-curing OptiBond FL, he's essentially doing immediate dent sealing. We'll get to that in a second.
Oh yeah.
So he's always told to pre-cure the adhesive first and then put it together. What's interesting is when I graduated and what I was told in dental school and what I was told in the CAD/CAM community was, no, don't pre-cure because the adhesive could pool, get too thick, and you'll get open margins. So always leave it wet. So I have this really good paper that I show in my courses that show just the devastating effects of not pre-curing. Because let's just think about this. Let's take the stress out of it. And that's what's interesting about Van Meerbeek's work on this is take the stress out of it. So we all agree dentin bonding is extremely technique sensitive. Cool. All right. So this really technique sensitive hard thing to bond, this is how we're going to try to bond it. We're going to put the bonding agent on wet. We're going to leave it there. We're going to then put resin cement on top of it in ceramic. We're going to try to shine the light through the ceramic, whatever is left over through the resin cement. Whatever left over after that, it's barely going to touch the bond. And then, since it's barely hardening, it's also going to get pulled on by the resin cement that's shrinking and getting more light than it. You're literally getting gaps everywhere when you do it that way. Maybe not in the superficial dentin, maybe not in the more shallow spots, but definitely in the corners and the deep dentin, which is hard to bond to. So the way I try to simplify immediate dentin sealing, because I feel like it just gets way too mystified for everybody, that it has to do with letting it mature for weeks on ends or fresh cut dentin or this, that, or the other thing. It's really about pre-curing your adhesive. So your adhesive gets the full amount of light and is able to cure and harden in a stress-free environment so you don't break the cake. And then you can go ahead and put your resin cement on top of it. So one of my friends, Wally Renee, Tony Manito, they're not really into the biomimetic thing, but they are really into the adhesive game. And my friend Clint Stevens, they all just pre-cure. So we just put the bond on, we pre-cure, and then we do resin cement. And I'm like, cool. I like to use ultra thick gold standard adhesives. And so what I do is I cure the adhesive before taking an impression so I get the best fit possible at delivery. That's all immediate dentin sealing is.
Basically, you just re-prep your enamel margin. I don't know if Charlie Cox was lecturing when you were in this field, but I followed him for years in this aspect of adhesive dentistry, and he definitely was a proponent of pre-curing. And I know there's a debate out there even now. Our technique that I've been doing for years, and by the way, you made that comment about bonding to enamel. That's how I started. We didn't have dental bonding, and those veneers are still in place. And then I started in the 90s where we had that impress. I taught at LVI, and we were prepping pretty aggressively, and we were relying on the dental bond strength. But I think you bring up the point there is that we weren't sensitive to getting that really good cure into the dentin, and then we were compromising that when we were cementing that on. But having said that, why don't you talk a little bit about the importance of the oxygen inhibitor layer and how we manage that before we cure?
So if you're doing it the way my friends Clint, Tony, and Wally are doing it, I don't think it's as big of a deal, and I can explain that in a minute. If you're doing immediate dent sealing and you're going to either temporize or leave it in the oral cavity and then go clean it later, I think it's really important. So the oxygen inhibitor layer is the upper 10 to 20 microns of any composite that's exposed to air does not cure. The reason why is like oxygen will sort of quench the free radical that's involved in photoinitiator and driving polymerization. So that whole upper layer winds up still being uncured monomer and sort of jelly. And there's actually a lot of misconceptions with it. I remember when I was first getting on the scene, a lot of people thought that you have to have that layer in order to bond to dentin, because everyone thinks it's like an uncured end of the chain that you're grabbing onto.
Right.
But that doesn't actually make any sense when you think about it, because it's uncured monomer, not
Right.
polymer. So it's not part of the chain. It's not a
So
link in the
it's really
chain.
not the free radical component that you need to bond
No.
to.
So this is from having some good conversations with Jujin Dagami and other really good material scientists and sort of putting this together. And Bart Van Meerbeek. One of the most critical components of bonding is something called wettability. So
Right.
how intimately are we contacting the surface we're trying to bond to? That's why bonds are low viscosity and runny versus being like paste, because it's got to get into every nook and cranny so it can lock in. So when you have an oxygen inhibitor layer on top of your composite, the composite underneath is only like 50 to 70% cured, meaning it's almost like a sponge rock with like little microscopic caves of uncured monomer. So the layer you have on top is already like intimately integrated into those layers. So if you're able to harden it, you've got this great lock. If you remove it, it just means you have to use something very low viscosity that can flow into there. And that's why if you remove the oxygen inhibitor layer, as long as you place bonding agent over that area, it's going to reintegrate. And all the research we have,
yeah, I think that's the point. That's the point is doing that.
Re-wetting it. And
yeah,
all the evidence we have from the 80s and 90s and 2000s shows us that if you remove the oxygen inhibitor layer, as long as you properly clean it and re-wet it, and air abrasion is the best way to clean it, you can bond to it. So circling back, the oxygen inhibitor layer is this upper 10 to 20 micron layer of uncured monomer sitting on top of the composite. Your bonding agents, the good ones, like the gold standard ones that are thick, like Clearfill SE and SE Protect is about 30 to 40 microns thick. And OptiBond FL, because it's filled, it's like 55% filled. FL stands for filled and light cured.
Right.
It's like 80 to 120 microns. Okay. So 10 to 20 microns on 80 microns is still going to leave you with 60 microns of really good filled cured adhesive.
Yep.
On Clearfill SE, it's a little bit more detrimental. It'll drop it down to 20. So you'll still have a decent bond, but if you go to clean it or air abrade it, you might remove it. Where it really starts impacting things that people don't think about is single bottle adhesives. Single bottle simplified adhesives are ultra thin. They're anywhere from 5 to 20 microns in thickness. And it's something that's well understood in the adhesive community, means that like some of your adhesive doesn't even get cured. So you have a couple problems with single bottle adhesives. One of them is you don't get all the solvent out. So you have little islands where solvent is trapped where you have no bond, and it's drawing up water from dentin. You have other little islands of area where it's not cured because of oxygen inhibition. So it looks more like a screen than like a single hydrophobic layer, which would be the best for durability.
Right.
So I will answer your question at some point. Sorry. So circling back, one of the ways to reinforce some of these single bottle adhesives is to put a thin increment of flowable composite over the top. Because the way I explain this to my students is not only is it making the layer extra thick, but some of the free radicals from that composite will descend down and further polymerize it. So it sort of further hardens the adhesive underneath. It's like putting glycerin over your oxygen inhibitor layer, but you're putting composite over instead. It'll cure your oxygen inhibitor layer before it's removed, so it'll make your adhesives thicker, harder, and you also have a protective layer on top. This is called resin coating. Juji Dagami actually began studying this in the early 2000s. My really good friend Marco Gaval, who I'm actually going to visit with this weekend, did the paper with Dr. Monnier, and it was an awesome paper where it was OptiBond FL, and they showed even with a filled adhesive, doing a resin coat, as it's called, will further reinforce it. So I teach my students 4 reasons why to resin coat. One, it'll cure the oxygen inhibitor layer of the adhesive, so making it thicker, stronger, and more durable. It'll put a protective layer over your adhesive, so if you're doing immediate dent and sealing and you want to go clean later, you're not going to accidentally remove it. And yeah, it's going to further cure what's underneath. It can't rescue everything. What we found in the literature is someone will pull an article and go like, "Oh, resin coating didn't improve the bond strength." I'm like, that bond was so bad that you couldn't even resin coat it and help.
Anyway, yeah. No, I hear you.
So I think I
Well,
did a
listen,
roundabout.
I want to respect your time here. And before we wrap this up, because I know you have some other appointments, I wanted to talk more about your work-life balance. And I pulled a photograph of your beautiful family here. How do you make that work? Because when I talk to dentists, I talk about two phases of work-life balance. Number one, I want a work-life balance when I'm in the office, right? And I also want one at home. How are you making that all work with your ambitions and everything that you're doing in life?
Because I don't do much else. So I do the
Yeah.
practice. I don't have a ton of hours. I'm working on getting more. We need to be a little busier. But yeah, right now I'm only doing about 3.5 days a week in my practice. And then I do the Instagram thing either between patients or first thing in the morning. This year I haven't traveled much for the Institute, but I'd say I probably travel over the last 2 years 6 to 8 times a year. And then I'm just a homebody. I
Yeah.
really I don't do anything except I don't ditch my wife for 8 hours to go play golf on Saturday. And I'm
Yeah.
not knocking my friends that do. I think their kids are older. My kids right
Right.
now are 4 and 7, and I just don't want to lose these years. So really, I'm really boring outside of the Bard Institute and the practice. I'm really just a homebody, and I just hang out with my family. They're cute and adorable. We're
Yeah,
physically
they are.
affectionate family. I feel like I could be doing better as a dad in the respect that, like, James does flag football, but I kind of feel like, man, I could be doing more stuff on the weekend or taking him camping. But like, I wouldn't say I read to him every night, but I tuck him in every night and kind of sit with him until he passes out. And we have family dinners together. Like, all four of us sit together every night that I'm in town. Except for tonight, I'm going out and doing something, but that's a rarity. So I do think, as a dad in that department, like, he knows he's loved. I'm there when I can be. I wish I could be ultra dad, like coach of his team and like taking him camping and like building stuff in the woods. Like, I'm not that into it, but no, I'm around, and I won't let that part suffer. And my wife knows to call me out on it. And my wife is also the kind of person we're both from the East Coast, and she's a strong woman, and so I love having someone that'll call me on my stuff. But
Oh,
she also
yeah.
likes that I'm not just going to take stuff. So we have a really cool dynamic.
Well, I'm similar in my marriage as well, because I married my fourth grade sweetheart, so we've been together for years, and she actually became a marriage family therapist after we got married. But we lost a child. We went through some recovery on that. We still are. It never goes away. But what I love about her is that she looks at the family and she's very protective, and I feel like my whole commission in life is it's all about my family and providing for them. And she provides for me in so many different ways in that support. But I think our wonderful wives, they'll look at the family because they're so bonded. Their brains work different than a male brain, and to them, they want that total peace and closure with the family. And I'm a big proponent of family, and I know people have gone through disappointments maybe that are watching today. It's not a criticism at all. I always say, look, we all make mistakes in life, but every day we put the best we can into it. The other thing I want to address before we quit here is I'm looking at your good times with your teaching, and below I will post your link to your Teaching Bard Institute. I was on there, and in fact, I have an online site that I feel like I need to redo the website, because I produce a lot of videos, which I love doing. In fact, that's what I do up here. But I hope to go another 10 years. That will put me about 75. But mainly because I love what I do. And when I watch you here, and I've seen you speak once, I mean, you definitely are into what you do, and you love connecting, changing lives forever. And
Yeah.
there's nothing like it when a doctor comes back and said, look, that class I took, I have a better life now. There's nothing like
Yeah.
that.
I personally, I don't know how to handle it. I don't handle receiving gifts very well, and it's weird to me. Well, weird's not the right word. It's very humbling to me is the right word when I have people. I have that effect on dentists. You know, even dentists only been practicing 3 years, but dentists that have been practicing 15 years, and I get these reviews or comments like you know, I can't look at dentistry the same again, or you completely changed the way I practice. I love the way I practice now because of, you know, doing what you do, and
Yeah.
I love your positive take on it, and that's why I love talking to you because it's an awesome responsibility that I don't think we should be afraid of, but we should
Yeah.
be embraced. Very, very grateful for, and I am grateful for those kinds of interactions,
Oh,
even though sometimes
so
I feel like I
much.
deserve.
Because, you know, we think of our nuclear family at home, but your family is, when you're an educator, your family's really big. And my whole focus of education, you know, I've gone through different phases of it, but particularly in the last 15 years, it's really nothing about me. It's about trying to give back so people can make better choices. I mean, I've gone through most every hiccup you can imagine. And just when you think you have it all down, you see something new, but that's part of practicing dentistry. But when we can pass on knowledge and anecdotal experience that will be practical to someone so they have a better life and they can go home and love their family even more because they're being better stewards of their time and all that, there's nothing like it. And that's what drives me. And I really appreciate your time today. I really admire you a lot. I would suggest you go to the Bard Institute website. You have a lot of online CE available as well. And just some advice for the future, build that site, keep building it, because that will allow you to do anything you want.
You have to let me say something before we close. So I hope you know, and I'm not just saying this because we're on this, that you were one of my biggest inspirations for doing this. So you gave me all this love and affection, which I appreciate. But really, you doing things independently, even just your practice. I remember watching one of your videos. You just kind of talked about your operating theater, which I almost called my practice the other day, which is really funny. So I love how you call it that because it's not old school, but there's a show I like. The guy who calls it the theater, you know, when he's going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to me, my wife says maybe I use it too much on my videos, but
no, it's amazing.
I don't know. Ingo at Sirona, before they were Dentist by Sirona, said, you know, that kind of coined it. But regardless, it is what I love. And when I'm still chairside, my eyes are still pretty good. I'm in a different world. It's just like, it's me in that mouth, and I know you work through a microscope, but when we get into that realm, I mean, I'm in my sanctuary and what I love to do, and I love ceramics and what we do. But most importantly, I love you as a colleague and a clinician, and I look forward to where you go. I'm going to be your biggest fan. I'm going to watch where you go. You have so much to give. You've already given so much. And part of this podcast, We Talk Dentistry, is about uplifting our profession and highlighting those that are really making a difference. And you're definitely one of those. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Hold on just a moment, and we will close this up. So thank you, Dr. Stephen Schiffenhaus. It's amazing. His contact data is below. Now you know more about what really happens in our adhesive theater. And I'll tell you, having gone into that early in my career and watching what's happened, I see what it can be. And I'm going to do our theme song here, and it's all about Don't Waste Any Time. That's the title of this song, and that would be my advice to you. Don't waste any time in your career. Continue learning. Have an attitude of gratitude. Learn from many. And I always tell people that come to my classes, become a hybrid of who you are. Learn from a lot of people, because that's the wealth that we will become as we become a hybrid to improve our profession and always be the best we can be. So thanks for watching today, and I'll look forward to you in the next podcast real soon. Bye now.